Okay. So we're about to switch gears a bit and move from more focused industry engineering to arts and to science in a different genre. I'm Dr. Melinda Connor, and I'm part of a team for this particular project at Cal State Dominguez Hills through the Peyton Foundation. And we're looking at a 200-year-old problem. And we basically used computer methodology and engineering techniques to be able to reverse engineer how to come at a science problem that's 200 years old, that nobody is alive anymore to ask the questions with, and nobody is alive anymore to actually do the analysis on. So we came at the process starting at the very beginning. And my partner in crime could not be here today. She's unfortunately unwell. But it's Dr. Sally Ann Peyton. She is the professor emeritus in law from University of Michigan, the William Cook Chair. We started with a concept. We wanted to look at how to heal urban violence. What are we going to do? How can we get some sort of intervention into the urban environment that would begin the process of healing urban violence? And we wanted to do it with sound. Sound is portable, sound is easy, sound is cost-effective, sound already has a place in the urban environment, and sound is accessible. You can make noise, and you can do it very straightforwardly and very easily, each one of you individually. So we did an initial meeting, and in the process of that meeting, we decided that what we wanted to do was develop a 21st century spiritual. And the spiritual was, yes, going to be connected to components in the divine, but it would be non-denominational, and it would be something that would have a physiological impact. Because when you're dealing with urban violence, a large component of what you're dealing with is PTSD on the basis of the violence. So we looked at the structure of the process and went with some energy psychology techniques starting in our initial dialogue. And energy psychology techniques have recently been approved by the American Psychological Association. They're ways of stimulating and down-regulating the nervous system. So you've got somebody in overdrive. Anybody here ever go into overdrive when you're working long hours? Occasionally, just a bit. So the overdrive factor, you go ahead and if you tap in particular places on the body, you can down-regulate the nervous system. That shift and down-regulation of the nervous system becomes key when you're dealing with a repetitive process like PTSD. And so we looked at a couple of those particular pieces. And so we had a panel of experts that we convened, that we brought in, that were from historical spirituals and from the music world and from the psychological and neurological world. And we brought them all together in a meeting in California, and we brainstormed, essentially doing the same kind of process that we were doing. And we spent about 8 hours in the process talking back and forth, and we realized that the original spirituals that we were looking at, which are the antebellum Negro Spirituals, and that's the correct title. It's a group of 6,000 works that came out of the slave history in the South. The group of works had already the elements that we needed in it. The historical works had an inherent power. And so we began a process to develop a theory of why they worked and how they worked. And again, we had no idea what we were going to get, and no one we could directly ask, because everybody's dead already. Makes it an interesting kind of challenge. So we started looking at survival. What were the elements that caused people to be able to survive during the period? They had not enough food, not adequate clothing, impossible health care. The only thing they had was the music that they created themselves. They had an environment which was as restrictive and physically controlling as they could possibly make it. And it was an emotionally repressive environment. So the opportunity to transform that was key. Intellectually repressive as well, absolutely. You're not taught to read, you're not taught to write, except for a very exclusive few. You're not taught to problem solve, you're taught to be an automaton, essentially.
So in Venezuela, the people are needing music.
If they had known music was so powerful, that it prohibited that also.
And in some plantations, in fact, they did. It was the advent of the traveling Methodist minister and the Baptist minister eventually that came to the areas that actually brought the opportunity for the music to be utilized in these ways. So we started out looking at computer databases. Once we defined the basic concept, we wanted to see what kind of original literature there was out there. Now, 20 years ago, we couldn't have done this. We'd have had to have traveled to the actual universities. But for example, University of North Carolina, University of Georgia, both now have extensive databases with original writings of people in that period. And it's people from all walks of life that were involved in that period. So it became very, very important. And what we started to look at was the actual physical descriptions of what went on, what were people's lived experiences in their own words. So with the lived experiences, we could start to say, okay, we have a parallel here between what we've got happening 200 years ago and what we've got happening now. If there's a parallel, there's likely to be some sort of component in terms of physiological response that's going to be the same process. So we matched the physiological processes that we were seeing in the writings with what was going on now. And we looked at the neuroscience databases and said, okay, if somebody is abused in this particular way, this is where we see the issue. And we could generally say, the odds are likely it's going to be in that same general area. Odds are likely it's going to be the same kind of stress. So then we went out and we looked at the music literature and we matched the areas that music had direct impact on the brain, essentially using reverse engineering processes, matching what the music did back to those sections of the brain where there was physiological damage, to compare the physiological impact. And what we found was actually quite startling. We found whole sections of the brain that are actually being repaired by music. You want something to throw into your suits. You want to keep the guys more functional. Seriously, not kidding. I can pick key signatures for you. Say again?
Give me 10 seconds.
Huh?
Give me 10 seconds.
Go for it.
In Venezuela, we have an oppressive government. So the people have been with music therapy for the last 6-7 years. And I used to laugh at them until I read her paper. I really mean that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Does it matter what type of music?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it actually makes a difference.
How heavy are the correlations? Is it universal or is it very high?
We looked across the world in the neurological studies.
Individuals who do not respond in this way.
At this time, with the data that we have, I'm qualifying it that way because we have not directly studied the spiritual on the neurological work, okay? We've done this through a comparative analysis and reverse engineering process. What we know is that certain keys have direct effect. We know that certain tempos make a significant impact. We know that microtonal differences on each side of the brain make a direct impact. We know that when you're varying key signatures across a range of things, it has an impact. The languaging has an impact. The tonal qualities have an impact. Pentatonic scale versus the octave makes a difference. So the shape of the music itself is a factor. How you're arcing the music across a period of time. All of this is a factor. And as I said, we looked across international databases, so we looked across all of the literature that we should find. So these seem to be fairly universal responses in terms of how it impacts the body.
Not quite the question. I believe it's culture independent.
Okay.
Clearly there will be a few people who are neurologically
There will be a later, greater or lesser degree.
variant,
Yes.
Psychological patterns that may not be affected in some cases, or may be affected differently. And I just wonder if you have any idea.
If we've got, for example, someone with severe bipolar illness which was generated by repetitive PTSD traumas and episodes, and we're looking at brain repair of that particular process, if the correct nutrition is not there, the music is only going to do so much. If the correct support in terms of the nervous system stimulation is not there, the music is only going to do so much. So there are levels of qualification, certainly, in terms of the repair process.
There are people we know who are just not going to
Respond?
respond to music at all. They're going to either
I don't know that that's correct.
completely deaf, completely...
Their body will still respond.
Their body may respond.
The body
Going
will
to be
still
people
respond.
who are going to have synesthesia and may have some complications from the music that are not going to participate.
Depending on the type of synesthesia, for example, graphene wouldn't make a difference. There may be a problem, there may not.
I'm just
And,
saying that
yeah, so there will be a variant.
responses are going
There
to
will be a variant, yes.
It might be worthwhile mentioning, I know you look internationally, if you go back a few thousand years, the Bible records the first case of this. One of the prophets was very depressed because he was dealing with a king who was more oppressive than Venezuela. And they asked him to prophesy, and he said, well, go get me a musician. And now we understand what happened. He wanted his brain repaired.
He needed the burst, yes.
This might be too far-reaching a question, but does the research show that if you have somebody, say, with bipolar disorder, that you can heal them with music?
You can make a difference,
Okay.
okay? There are an awful lot of factors that go into the healing process. As I said, nutrition, neural stimulation, stressors in terms of life, generalized structural support underneath their life, things like that all make a difference. Drug addiction, alcohol addiction, all sorts of things like that can make a difference. So there are factors which are involved, but yes, it makes a change.
Practice within the mental health field?
It's an active process within the music therapy discipline.
Okay.
And with some mental health groups, it's being utilized. With others, it is not. If you're interested, actually, some really nice work was done by Monroe Institute, directly addressing brain coherence states. And that's something that could be employed in the suits very, very effectively. That's long been used by DOD. Yes?
We're talking about analogy earlier. I look at the systems engineering, software engineering, you look at families of systems. There are
Yes.
two things you want to leverage. You want to look at what the commonalities are and the variances. It sounds like you're looking at the commonality, the common sounds that will have a physiological effect. I'd be willing to guess that in your studies you might be able to extract the variances, the psychological effect based on the demographics, the geographics, what those individuals in those regions, religions, whatever other aggregate there is to provide a variant response that's more psychological than physical.
At this point, we don't have enough neuroscience data to do it. We made an annotated bibliography. It is available on the Cal Dominguez Hills Music website. You go out to the African Diaspora Project and Spirituals for the 21st Century. We narrowed down the neuroscience research to 113 really solid studies and annotated the bibliography, so the information is there. But there just isn't enough research yet to do that. I can give you pieces, but I can't give you the whole. And it's very, very frustrating.
But it's very, very exciting.
It is. It's delicious. It's very delicious.
Particularly in the neurological area, because most disorders are looked at maintaining a level of acceptance and keeping you from being out of control. So it's
Yes.
keeping your life at a normalcy, so to speak, and not really solving any of the issues that you have.
Not actually coming along and saying, okay, we can do these following things and do repair.
Yeah, right. There's
You
nothing.
know? If you meditate, if you become a championship meditator, I can help you grow gray matter and white matter. Short of that, this music work is the only way that I've found that does it. That's going to be useful long term. Now, one of the pieces that we had to watch was it's really, really easy in a situation like this to go and say, well, it's logical that it would be this, and not look at the data. So keeping the edges on the process were extremely important. Not to extrapolate too far. We had to keep the information clean. So one of the key things that we found as we started to do the research, because this is an interdisciplinary team, a historian who's also an attorney, who is also a very fine musician, a musicologist who's the leader in this area of music and is an extraordinary musician and singer. She has the most beautiful voice. And I've danced in the music world most of my life. And then I was handling the neuroscience piece. So we were coming into it with a common basis of the music and an understanding of the music. But we also were coming to it with various areas of expertise. So we started looking at the history of the process, and we discovered that the music that came over was not simple when it came from Africa to America. And the groups of people that came, entire communities were brought over. The priests, the shamans, the chiefs, the various members of the community were brought because a lot of the people were brought as a loss in wartime. The various groups would fight with each other, and whoever lost got sold.
The wise women, too, don't forget the women.
Yes, and they're a key piece of the process. The sound of your grandmother humming became one of the key phrases, one of the key elements that we found all the way through. It was fascinating. The sound of your grandmother humming. Do any of you remember that? One of your grandparents singing or hanging out? It's actually quite beautiful to listen to if you get a chance. There was another piece and component that drove this process. Determination is often a key in survival. And expectation effect, which we don't begin to understand in medicine yet, the placebo effect, the expectation effect, is a key piece. And this is from Walter Rhett's book. For Africans, religion was not only faith in worship, but a belief that rested on results. It was a results-oriented process from the beginning. So we had disruption of family systems, we had inadequate housing and food supplies, we had a constant threat of physical violence, limited survival expectation. But over the process of the years, we went from a 3-year survival expectation to all of a sudden, generations are reproducing themselves. And the key element that we found was the music. So the spirituals themselves have 4 basic components: the ritualistic prayer songs, the ring shouts, the folk ballads, and the work songs. And what we found were the ring shouts were particularly important. Now, science hasn't identified this properly yet. So I'm going to make a claim that I cannot back up. And that is that the human body is a 3-dimensional electromagnetic system. Okay? I can't back it up in science yet. Having said that, if you place somebody in the center of the circle, when someone was beaten or abused, they were placed in the center of the circle, and you bring people running a 3-dimensional magnetic field revolving around them, you're creating a core vortex electromagnetically in the center of that process. You're going to produce a physiological effect from that process. And that's actually, the fact that they're a 3-dimensional electromagnetic field means that a percentage of your people are going to short out your suits. You need to pay attention to that. Hey, I break computers from across the room. It's what IBM used to pay me for. So a key piece of the process was the call and response and the languaging. There was a definition of what they wanted. They wanted an action to take place. They would define the pain. They would name the difficulty. Then they would modulate and move toward what could change it. And then they would go from there to how to move forward. All right, we don't have many more minutes, so I am going to jump to the basic pieces. The theory fundamentally is this: when you bring people together in community, there's a sense of safety. And that safety and sense of self-esteem that's established within community makes a difference. Each individual within the community has to have something that they feel good about. They have to have some area that they have an expectation of expertise. There was a valuing. It changes the medial prefrontal cortex, it changes the frontal lobes. Modulation of the sound itself made the difference. The frontal parietal circuits, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the medial parietal circuits, and the dorsal medial frontal circuit are all a factor in how the integrated aspects of the brain end up working. Those pieces are part of the religious parietal circuit as well. Religion is actually good for your brain, guys. I realize that can be tough for some of you to believe, but it actually does good things for your brain. It increases vascular flexibility. It improves oxygenation. The music actually adds an extra burst in the change of the breath control. It builds community because when you're making music together, you begin to breathe together and your heartbeats begin to become simultaneous. And so there is a unity of thought which happens as the process. And it reinforces your cross-cortex integration, so you think better. In addition, the small tonal differences which are happening in any kind of a congregational setting in terms of the musical sound mean that you're able to recognize cognitive dissonance faster. Cognitive dissonance is key when you're about to get the heck beat out of you. If you can recognize things are about to go south faster, you can survive longer. It's a survival component that is key in that process. So all of the standard cortexes and visual and auditory cortexes get engaged in that process. There's also an alignment of neurological activity that happens in meter stress. So the cadences that people will sing when they're marching, or the beat that you've got going when you're listening to the rock music in the car. Those cadences, those rhythmic structures are actually going to change the rhythmic stress within the brain, and again can create cross-cortex linkages and increased flexibility. The frontal temporal language network is a key component in the process. The languaging of transformation that happens in the lyrics becomes critical to the process. The languaging is key because there's an evolution and path defined to a survivable, viable, better option. Okay? That's a key piece. You're essentially providing hope and a pathway to hope. We're done? Okay. I have to stop. I want to add just one last piece of it. If you have questions and about the theory, about the process, we do have a video that's on the website, which is a different lecture, slightly different information, but it's a 2-hour lecture on some of the materials. It's the Cal State Dominguez Hills Music Department website. You go down to the bottom of the page and you click on the African Diaspora Project. That page comes up and you click on Spirituals for the 21st Century. Thank you.